Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever in the world you're at right now. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Pat Flynn, and we are on day 124 straight of broadcasting the income stream every single morning. And so long as we are in this situation in the world, I will be here showing up for you. And I'm so thankful for you showing up for me. If you're here live with me, say hello to the rest of your team here. If you are watching the replay, hashtag replay or hashtag team replay in the comment section. Today we're talking about the art of story selling. The art of story selling, right? The idea of telling stories so that you are more likely to close sales. And I'm not talking about sales always in the sense of making more money. We sell things all the time and we don't even know it. We sell people into our email list, right? When we offer an opt-in and try to get people to subscribe to our newsletter. We sell people when it comes to having people subscribe to our Twitter account or Instagram or TikTok. We sell to our kids when we're trying to convince them to do house chores. We sell all the time, and stories are a major, if not the most important component of selling. It makes selling a little easier such that the selling kind of just happens naturally if you tell that story well. So today we're going to talk about a number of things related to story selling to help you in your journey as an entrepreneur, business owner, no matter what level you're at. Appreciate you being here. Team Flynn for the win. Enjoy the intro. Let's get started.
This is the income stream to help you achieve your dream, all while we keep it clean. This is the income stream. It's the kind of show where you can come and go, but then you leave inspired with no fee required. The income stream with Pat Flynn.
Yo, the art of story selling. That's what we're talking about today. And again, I appreciate you being here. Sorry I cut off the intro, but we have a lot to talk about today when it comes to storytelling and story selling. As Peasant Uprising says, y'all are amazing. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being here too. Now I have to tell you a quick story. So, and actually we can get some music behind this too. Adding some flavor, meaning background music, especially if you're on different platforms like a live stream or on a podcast or on a video, can be really great. They can be a little bit distracting, so make sure if you do have music in the background, it sort of fits and it's a little bit lower. But I want to tell you a quick story. In fact, this happened the other day. And this was when my family and I were going to have lunch. In fact, there's this restaurant across town that we haven't gone to in a while. So I wanted to drive over there. My son wanted to come. And when Keone is his name, wanted to come, he said, "Hey, Daddy, can I play with the iPad in the car?" And typically my wife and I, we don't let them play, the kids play their devices in the car, because the car is actually a great conversation area, right? Where if we put down our devices for a while, we're all in a contained space together, we can have some really fun conversations and ask a lot of great questions. That's something that my wife and I love to do with our kids, is ask questions. That's what a good coach does. And if you know me, you know coaching is not just about telling people what to do. It's actually about asking people what they think and having them self-identify what they should be doing. Anyway, we typically say no when our kids ask for using devices in the car. But this time I just wanted to see what Keone would say. So this time I said, "Hey, well, if you can convince me why I should let you play the iPad in the car, I'll let you play the iPad in the car." And he goes, "Whoa, really?" Because he was really surprised. We don't usually even offer him that choice, right? So he starts talking about why he loves playing the iPad. Because I love playing Minecraft, I love playing Fortnite, and I can play it as we go along, and it's really fun, and I just can't put it down. It's so fun. And then I go, "Well, that doesn't really convince me." And he goes, "But I love playing the iPad. Like, it's my favorite thing to do." And I'm like, "Okay, well, let me reframe this for you. Tell me why I should let you play the iPad in the car." And he goes on, "Well, I just love building, and I'm really close to this next level in this game, and I just really thought it'd be fun to play." And I go, "Okay, hold on. I have a lesson opportunity here. There is a way to ask people for something that you want that is more likely to enable you to get that thing," right? So I was thinking about, there's actually two ways to do this. I have developed something in my life called the Pat asking technique, or otherwise known as Pat, P-A-T for short. The Pat asking technique. And this is how I used to ask her things when I was a kid, right? I go to my mom and I'd be like, "Hey, Mom, you're probably not going to say yes to this. In fact, it's okay if you do, but I was wondering if we could go to the grocery store and I can get some bubble tape, bubble gum or something, whatever I was asking for. It was always sort of a reverse psychology. Hey, you're probably going to say no to this. And oftentimes that would work. It would have like a 54% conversion rate with my mom. Never worked with my dad though, because I would tell my dad the same thing. I eventually learned this really quickly. Hey dad, you're probably going to say no, but I was wondering if I can ask you. And he's like, no, you already told me I'm going to say no. So no. So that never worked. So I always started with mom, but then I went to dad afterwards. Okay. So I go to my son and I go, I'm not going to teach him the pat asking technique. That's sort of patented, and I'm just going to keep that. And that's a little bit dangerous. So we don't want to go there, right? What I do tell him is, hey, if you want to get something, you need to tell me why it's good for me. What's in it for me? And I get down on one knee and I go, you need to sell it to me. And he goes, you want me to sell your iPad back to you? And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is just not working out like the way I thought it was going to do. Anyway, I basically go, okay, this is your last chance. Tell me why it's good for me to say yes to you right now. And he goes, okay. And I see his gears turning a little bit. And he goes, well, if I'm playing iPad in the car, I won't be distracting for you. I'll be quiet. And as a result, we will be safer in the car. And I go, okay, now we're getting somewhere, but I'm still not convinced. And I love doing this when I give him one additional chance to go a little bit deeper, right? We talked yesterday about interviews and going deeper and how important that is, if that makes sense. So I give him one more chance and I say, tell me, and I keep saying for me, what's in it for me? Talk about me. And he goes, you were an architect, right, Dad? And I was like, yeah. And in my head, I'm like, what does this have to do with anything? He's like, well, if you let me play Minecraft, I can learn how to be a better builder. And then I could teach you some stuff so you can be a better architect. And I was like, wow. Well done. Well done. Okay, I like that. And I gave him credit for thinking about me. The big lesson here is to know your audience. You must know your audience when you're telling a story and you're trying to sell somebody on something, right? If you don't know your audience at all, or first, try to get to know them, right? Whenever I go to speak at different conferences, the first thing I always ask the person who I book this conference with is, who's in the audience? Tell me what they need. What are their biggest struggles? Where are they at right now? And if I know that, I can position my talk, a talk I've done many times before, specifically tailor it to them in a way that's going to make that much more of an impact. I'll better know where to start. I'll better know what stories to tell. I'll better know what ultimately they need. So the big thing we need to make sure is we know our audience. Again, that's the most important thing when it comes to storytelling. It's not always going to be possible, but if you can learn this, it helps you navigate the selling process 75% of the way there, right? 75% of the way there. So know your audience. And I'm going to go over a number of different things that relate to this idea of story selling, and I'll offer some time at the end to answer some questions too. So make sure you stick around. And the funny thing about that story is like, that happened for real. That happened 5 or 6 years ago. And it was just like a little moment in the day. I could have just breezed that over, and it could have just been a situation where I would have never even have thought about that thing again. But because I've trained myself to pay attention to things that happen in my life and to pull these moments out, no matter how small or minuscule they may be, I know that they can always be turned into, generally speaking, a lesson for those on the other end. You can have things happen. Like, let's say, for example, I don't know, you swerve on the road because there was a animal that you had to go around and you almost got in an accident or something, right? And then now we can tie that story, that thing that happened that typically we would kind of want to forget, and turn it into a lesson. How sometimes when you're driving down the road, there's going to be things that get in your way. And oftentimes they help us get off course. But as long as you know exactly where your destination is and where you're going, you'll be able to come back on track. I don't know, I just made that up. But over time, you'll learn, and I'll tell you exactly how to do this, how to collect these stories and capture them so that you can move forward and use them in the future. And this is especially helpful if you start speaking on stage, or if you start creating a lot of videos, or if you start podcasting quite a bit. You're able to now pull out real stories that have context. And that's the power behind stories here. They provide context to the lessons that you're teaching. They provide context to the decisions that a person is about to make. And when you can help either inspire or educate or entertain somebody, which stories can definitely do, you're more likely to convert them from a casual viewer to a customer, right? When you have that emotion behind it, right? If you just simply tell people what a program is going to be or what your coaching program is like, and that's essentially it, here's what you get, here's how much it costs, awesome, okay. If the problem is big enough and people have a dramatic need to solve that problem, then they're likely or potentially likely to purchase because the problem is that painful for them. But if you can provide story behind that, your own story and other people's stories to go along with it, who potentially you've helped serve, then it's going to just be that much easier. And the aggressiveness required and the beautiful multi-million-dollar copywriting required, all that stuff that a lot of the big players use, they won't even be necessary because you've told that great story, right? Okay. Chat, how you doing? I'm a little bit on a roll here, but I just want to check in with you. How's everybody going? Startup Flame, what's up? Good to see you here. We got just Samson in the house, full bro.
Bruh.
What's up, yo? Great. This is sit back, relax, listen, take notes, whatever you need to do. The second portion of this is we always need to make sure that when we are about to tell a story, we capture people's attention. Do whatever you can to capture people's attention. In fact, there's a lot of videos that I've watched about storytelling because I try to learn this craft. I try to get better at it. I try to hone in on it. Even though I feel like I'm a great storyteller, I always know I can improve. We can always improve. Storytelling is one of those things that we can always improve. And I mean, I remember watching Tiger Woods when he was at his prime, getting swing coaching, right? He hired somebody to help him with swing coaching, even though he was the best darned golfer in the world at the time. And then he went through some stuff, and then he came back. I mean, it's actually in and of itself an incredible story. But even though you might be good at something, you can always get better. And this is one of those things where you can get better at. Story has obviously become a very important component of my own history. It's become the thing that has sold my website, has sold my journey to people, and has you here with me today to follow along and to learn more, right? My story, which is very relatable, got laid off in 2008 from an architecture job that I absolutely loved, was unable to sort of get back on my feet until I discovered this world of online business. And then I built a business to help people in the architecture industry pass an exam called the LEED exam. And that exploded. And I made over $200,000 a year after launching that. And then I started Smart Passive Income to help encourage and teach people along the way to follow the same path and hopefully do even better and have it happen faster than me. That's the story in a nutshell, right? And I've told that story at least over 1,000 times. And it's funny because when a lot of people ask me to be on their show with their podcast, I have a lot of people go, hey, Pat, I'm sorry, but can I ask you to tell your story again? I know you've probably told it thousands of times, but can you tell your story again for my audience who may not know who you are? And I'm like, absolutely. I absolutely love to tell the story because that is something that can connect with the audience. And that's a beautiful way to start and to offer a first impression to become more relatable so that everything else that I teach later or say is going to be that much more paid attention to, if that makes sense. Right? So stories, very important. Capture people's attention. There's some videos I've watched about storytelling where the very first thing you need to do is before you tell a story, capture people's attention somehow. Kevin Hart does this all the time. You know, Kevin Hart, short Kevin Hart. There's some funny videos about Kevin and The Rock and how they sort of go back and forth with each other. It's so funny because he's really tiny compared to The Rock, especially. I think he's 5'2" or 5'3". I don't know. So I'm even taller than him. Anyway, he needs to do this because he's a little bit smaller and he doesn't have that presence, you know, where you walk in the room, he doesn't have that physical presence. So he has that personality presence instead. It makes up for it. And whenever he tells a story, you'll notice that he goes, hey, really quick, I got to tell you something. He doesn't go into the story until he has everybody's attention. Because if you don't have that attention, you're just telling story to air. So if you ever find yourself in a group situation, it's great. You could practice and at home. You can practice at parties or at meetups or whatever. These are great opportunities to practice storytelling. The first thing you need to do is capture people's attention, right? Capture people's attention. And it's really important to do. Online, there's different kinds of ways to do this. If you have a podcast or a YouTube channel, then in your videos, obviously, before you get into the details of that story, you definitely want to hook people up front. And we've talked about this several times. We've had specific episodes here of the income stream where literally we're just talking about the importance of the hook and how it's key, especially on YouTube. I mean, you have 8-10 seconds to capture a person's attention before they're off and running to some other video. On a podcast, you have about a minute. On a blog, you have about the first paragraph. The job of the first paragraph is to capture people's attention, to show relevance. Why is this important? Or create some sort of open loop to get people to watch all the way through. And then you can go a little bit more into the details, if that makes sense. By the way, if you're here live with me, hook me up with a thumbs up. That gives me a lot more energy, and I want to give that energy back to you. So we've captured people's attention. We now know who our audience is. This is really key. Always being authentic. If you're not authentic in your storytelling, if you're telling a story that's made up, if you're telling a story that's sort of forced, then it's not going to come across well. And in fact, it's going to be very, very difficult to develop. It's going to be very difficult to develop. I remember when I was writing my book, Will It Fly? This was back in 2016. I was having such a hard time. I eventually ended up hiring a coach, and a big shout out to Authors Who Lead coach Azul and his partner Steve. If you're looking for book coaching help, they're definitely the place to go. AuthorsWhoLead.com. And they have a great podcast and just an amazing program. Anyway, super helpful. Before I hired Azul, I was struggling internally because I wanted my books to be like the books that I was reading. And this is a very hard thing to do as an author. Let me know if you've ever written a book and you've fallen into this trap, or you've ever created any piece of content and you've fallen into the same trap too. I'll give you a shout out here on the stream. But when you've been reading an author so much and then you start writing, you kind of want to write like they do, right? I remember reading a lot of Malcolm Gladwell books, right? David and Goliath, Outliers, Blink, so many great books of his. And I was just like in a rabbit hole of Malcolm Gladwell that when I started writing my book, I was like, okay, my books have to have studies. I have to go deep into, this really amazing case study and understand language that professors from colleges would understand so that I can present this information and it'll be more believable, right? Because that's what happens with Malcolm Gladwell books. He creates these amazing connections through data and science and just, those kinds of things, right? So what if telling the story makes me ugly cry? Great. That's being authentic. If you ugly cry when you tell a story, then go ahead and ugly cry and own that ugly cry. Call yourself out on it. It'll become something that'll allow you to connect with people more, for sure. Luke says, haha, I did that when I began writing on Medium, right? You try to write like somebody else. Then I met the guy I started writing like. Interesting. I want to unpack that story for sure. Scully says, my first book almost made me crazy. That's I can relate to that, right? So although I love Malcolm Gladwell, I found out that I have to be authentically me when writing this story or writing this book, right? And when I started to dive into more of who I was and the kinds of things that I liked, the things that I was into, the words started just coming out, right? And if you've read my book, Will It Fly, you'll know that the beginning story in the book is in fact a story about my son, not the iPad story that I told earlier, but a story about him on his birthday and me teaching him how to create a paper airplane and having him just get so excited about it that in fact he was rushing the process and he wasn't following along. And how often do we as business owners don't follow along? We rush the process, we get excited, we see this cool thing, we go and we do it without even getting instruction or ready, fire, aim approach sometimes, which is good to do. But then of course, if you fire and it doesn't work and then you give up, that's not going to work out for you. This is exactly what happened with Keone. He made his first paper airplane. It looked more like a boat. He tossed it and it just flew to the ground. He tossed it again and then he's like, you know what? I'm not good at making paper airplanes. I'm going to go back to my Batman car. And that was tough for me as an avid paper airplane enthusiast. And I eventually learned that I needed to teach him in that moment to slow down and follow along and try again. And then we worked it out. And of course, this was the story in the book that set up the whole process of Will It Fly? You create a business, having some validation up front that something's going to work and having it be more likely to work out for you versus just rushing into something and just throwing a crumpled piece of paper that's going to go nowhere, right? So always be authentic. Now, if you are writing, this is a great question from With All My Sweetness. Should we write like we're talking to a friend? It depends on the context of this writing, but I think in general, most likely that you want to more write like you talk. Online, if you are writing online or even within a book that you're going to offer to your audience, writing like you talk is something that's going to be more easily connected to versus trying to be like somebody else or be this professor like, thesis writing type person that if that's not your audience, then they're not going to respond to it. If that makes sense, right? So anyway, more on that later, but let's always be authentic. And I think that if you get so authentic where you become a little bit emotional in your stories, like I was saying with Contempo Coding earlier, this can really make a big difference in how people connect with you. Now, it doesn't always have to be ugly cry. It can just be a tough moment of your life, or it can be a joyful moment of your life. It could be something that happened related to the steps that you're talking about. It could be the story of somebody else and how that made an impact on you. I think a big question I have, especially for speakers, or I get from new speakers is, Pat, I don't have that like life-changing story that, almost died kind of situation that I think would be impactful for people. So should I kind of create something or make something up? No, do not make something up, because that will just come across fake and you don't want to come across that way. You always want to come across authentic, right? Always be authentic. However, I do understand the dilemma of, well, I just feel like nothing interesting has happened in my life, right? And that's a valid thing to think about. So there's a couple things you can do. Number one, just realize that you don't have to have this crazy newsworthy story in order to make an impact. I told you this story that related to knowing your audience, which was just about my son asking to play the iPad in the car. And it's how you tell that story that matters, right? And it's the details that you tell within that story that provide context so people are there with you, such that they're no longer thinking, oh, should I get involved with this or not? Now they're in the story with you. And if you can lead them to a point of opportunity, lead them to a point where it's more like a lesson or what have you, the learning moment, whatever the case may be, it's going to be that much more impactful because of it, right? The other thing is, if you want to find one of these big stories, number one, you could find another person's big story and how it impacted you and the lessons that you've learned from that, right? A lot of creators do well and grow as a result of sharing their thoughts, their opinions, their emotions about somebody else's stuff. We see this on YouTube quite a bit. A lot of people doing sort of case studies about other YouTubers and doing well because of that. Johnny Dumas from Entrepreneurs on Fire interviewed thousands of entrepreneurs, and as a result, he himself has grown in authority because of that connection to those people who have the story. He was the story collector, right? So you can be the curator and still do well. But we need to be authentic. I think adding detail is key, but as Johnny here says, I agree with this. I can't stand when people embellish on their story to make it more shocking or compelling. The hard thing about this is you don't know what could be considered embellishment and over the top versus details that actually add to the story. A big filter I like to use is, if I don't tell this, will it take away from the story? If yes, then you want to keep it in. If not, then you can remove it, right? It's almost like adding images on your website. If this thing actually can be removed and it doesn't change anything for people, then let's remove it to begin with so that we can just have some really high level stuff within our blog posts. But that authenticity is key. And the other thing is, if you don't have a story yet worth sharing, go live a story worth sharing. Do something. Take a bold action. Challenge yourself, right? There was a speaker that I got really excited about back in the day who challenged himself to, I think, live through 100 failures in 100 days. So every 100 days, or every day, he did something that was out of his comfort zone to learn how to process fear, because he was the most fearful person in the world. And he went around and did things like would knock on a stranger's home and ask to play soccer in their backyard. And what was interesting is that he eventually learned over time that, yeah, although he got rejected a lot, it didn't actually matter that much as he thought. But number two, a lot of people said yes, right? A person did let him play soccer in the backyard. Another person, a cop did let him drive a vehicle, right? Like all these crazy things, which is pretty cool. So yes, everybody has a story to share, Manos, even if it's a simple one. like how you recently passed your exams.
Bruh.
Congratulations, Manos. Manos is a student, and he's been working hard, and he deserves some praise because he's been working really hard. And I believe your birthday was recently too. April's birthday is recently here as well, and also Samson. So many amazing people here in the audience. So, okay, let's keep going here. Thank you all for being here, by the way. The next thing that you can do to help yourself tell better stories and to help better convince people that you are worthwhile, that your programs are worthwhile, that you are worth subscribing to, etc., is to practice, practice, practice. Practice, 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 right? Practicing is the way to get better. And yes, you can practice your storytelling too. Practicing is great because you can figure out what's not so great. And this is where, if you were in a real life scenario, I would muster up the courage to try to consciously go, okay, I'm going to see if I can tell this story, and I'm going to work on, having this be a story that's compelling. And doing this just in real life. And now, obviously, we're not at work anymore, or we are not in conference mode right now, and it may be a while, but you can practice on Zoom. You can practice on a live stream. You could practice at home with your family or your friends on the phone. There's so many different ways that you could practice this, right? And if you just consciously go, okay, I have a story to tell. How might I craft this story? It's one iteration of many, but one nonetheless in the steps to get to that story where it's fine-tuned. And that's eventually where we want to go, to a place where your stories are fine-tuned. Because the cool thing about this is as you begin to collect these stories over time, big or small, seemingly important and just little minuscule ones, you can create what's called a story bank. And when you create this story bank, these become little, essentially, index cards, whether it's a story bank that's actually index cards and physical, or a story bank like what I have on Evernote, where I have different folders and stories that I can tag, that I can use in certain situations, and then I can pull them out, use them on blog posts, podcast episodes, or speaking on stage in my slides. This story bank becomes literally a bank that you could pull from and potentially help you make more money, right? Ramit Sethi told me this idea of a story bank. He has one of his own, and this is where I adopted this from. So I want to give credit to where credit is due. And I think when you're telling stories, it's important to do that as well. But Ramit, I don't know if this was at a conference or if he actually shared this to me in person, but he told me this idea of a story bank, a collection of stories that you found that are based on your own life that you can then organize in a way such that you can pull them out and use them again. And in fact, I started to develop this in 2011 when I started speaking on stage. And what's really cool is now when I'm in, even though I've used many of these stories on stage before, and I still continue to add to this over time, but when I'm in real life conversation now, what'll happen sometimes is, for whatever reason, a topic will pop up, and then I'll remember a story that I once told, or a story that's in my story bank, and then I can, again, capture people's attention really nicely, and then dive right into it. And because I've practiced it, remember, practice, 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 because I've practiced this, it becomes something that is just, people are blown away. I've even had people, when I'm in conversation with them, go, wow, how did you tell that story so well? And then I go, well, I literally practiced telling that before. And they go, really? Like, who does that? And I'm like, well, people who want to be great communicators. I don't say that, but that's the truth, right? And you likely have one or two stories that you've told before that you could probably tell again. And you probably should tell again. But you can always improve how you tell these stories. Part of great storytelling is the idea of providing context, providing a location, setting the scene, if you will. Another important component of storytelling is how you create tension. Tension is great because it allows for people to go, well, how is this going to be resolved, right? People wonder what's going to happen in the end. Tension, that sort of juxtaposition between perhaps where one was versus where somebody's going, or the hard thing, or the objection, right? The objections are really key. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But another important part of storytelling is, tying everything together. And, when you put these things together and you practice, you can make an impact. And storytelling is absolutely key. It is by far probably the number one best marketing tool and skill that you can learn is storytelling. And when you combine this with the likes of lessons from Donald Miller and StoryBrand, where you are supposed to tell more stories, in fact, not just about you. I think telling your story is important too, right? Who tells your story is important, and how you tell your story is important. A little Hamilton reference there. I'm not going to give up my shot, but telling other people's stories, in particular, the success stories of your audience, elevating and spotlighting the hero stories in your audience elevates your brand as a result too. There can be an act of types, right? Like a first act, second act, third act. I think that's just a very common way. I think there's a question from here, from Kwok, who's asking about, well, should there be the rules of three? Generally speaking, 3 is a good number. If you're giving 3 examples of something, 3 is a good thing. Start with, an impactful one. Then the middle one is not so great, but it's still relevant. And then the third one and the final one is like the best example. There's the idea of 3 acts, right, in a movie. The beginning, which is essentially the beginning, which is essentially like setting the scene and establishing baseline, right? This is establishing baseline. Like I said in the beginning with my iPad story with Keone, where he asked me to come speak in the car. Normally, we say no to that, and that's it. That's baseline, right? That's even in a little story like that, there's a baseline. That's Act 1. Act 2 is, okay, now we are in a different place. Now we have some challenges, right? So the challenge in this iPad story with Keone was, okay, well, this time we're actually not going to say no, and we're going to try something different. We're going to see if Keone can sell me on the idea of bringing the iPad in the car and actually being able to play with it. So now there's tension. Now there's wonder. How is this going to work? We're in a new world now. If you've ever seen this sort of hero story or the hero's journey, right? It always starts with baseline foundation. This is how things are. Then there's a challenge, or there's some, you're in a different world now and the rules are different. And then now there's some beasts and battles and, tough moments. And I shared one of those moments in this story, the moment where after 4 or 5 tries, Keone was just not getting it. He kept talking about how he wanted to play Minecraft and he was not selling it to me. And then coming back around and having some sort of conclusion or sort of big climax, right? The big climax of the story with Keone was, well, he eventually learned to talk to me in what I would benefit from saying yes. And the story being, well, he said, well, if he was able to play Minecraft in the car, he could become a better builder and he could teach me how to become a better architect, since he knew I was an architect. Since then, he's asked to come into the car and play iPad again, and we've always said no, but that was just one moment. And then now we're back to normal, right? Now, normal, he knows now, the new normal, how to sell something, and now we all can take that lesson. How to sell something. You know who your audience is. So does that make sense? Hopefully it does. Consult the Blind Guy asks, is there a point at which the story is too old to share? Like working since youth, like generations past. Thanks again for all your help and advice for everything. No, I think stories, especially ones that are relevant throughout time, should be continued to be told. I think, however, you can always upgrade them. You can always add more flavor to them, if that makes sense. But if the story works, don't stop telling it. You also have to obviously know that if you have an audience of subscribers and they've already heard that story, you might want to back down on how much you say it because you've already sold them. You want to tell a different story that's more relevant to them, if that makes sense. All right. Hello, Britson7. Good to see you here. Thanks so much for being here today. So chat, let me know. Are we making sense here? I've been talking a lot and there has not been that many questions, so maybe it's sitting well. But I just want to make sure we're understanding this idea of story selling and how we can capture people's attention, how we can say things and convince people through the act of telling stories, either our story or somebody else's stories, why they should continue to follow us, why they should continue to work with us, and how to make people feel like they're a part of the process with us, if that makes sense. Yes, thank you for highlighting the struggle or tension or identifying the issue. If you want to practice storytelling, try to tell an amazing story about usual daily tasks like brushing your teeth. Yeah, that's great, because if you could nail storytelling about brushing your teeth, well, then you can absolutely nail telling a story where there's some actual lessons in context, right? Love this. Thank you, says cooking with a little spice. Thank you. And thanks for the little spice as well. Sense has been made, since Luke. Sense has been made. Cool. So let's talk about the last thing. This idea of being objection focused. This is where specifically if you're selling something, the objection focused stories go a very long way. So let me tell you a quick story about a woman named Dr. B. Dr. B, over 60 years old, has this beautiful dog that she takes with her everywhere she goes to help her around. And I met her at a conference. It was actually 2017, Chalene Johnson, 850 people in the crowd, but she stood out to me because she was somebody who I got to meet before I spoke on stage. She was very genuine, and I loved her for that. And she was very excited about what I was going to talk about on stage, which was the idea of podcasting. Well, anyway, I spoke on stage, and this was actually the first time I ever sold anything on stage. I was very nervous. I was very scared. In fact, I was wearing a dark blue button-down shirt, and I tried not to raise my hands too much because legit there was like sweat stains, dark, like black looking sweat stains. I don't know, water turned this blue shirt black when it was wet, and it was just like boom, water fountains coming under my arms. Anyway, I tell my 45-minute story about podcasting and how it's changed my life. I then go into about a 15-minute pitch to sell my podcasting course on stage. This was actually how I beta launched the course. Chalene Johnson was so inspirational to me and actually was the one who convinced me to do this because I was always feeding people to other people's courses, but she said, no, Pat, people want to learn from you. And part of the deal was if you purchased there during that time, you got it at a lower price. You also got access to some special bonuses, and you got to meet me backstage after. And I got to meet Dr. B again, and she was actually so excited about starting a podcast. She's wanted to do it for a while, but she wasn't going to do it because she thought she was too old. She was too scared of the technology. You know, remember, she's over 60. Yet I was able to, through storytelling and through my time on stage, convince her that, hey, maybe she could do it too. So a couple weeks go by, she gets access to the course, and she sends me this email. And she goes, oh my gosh, Pat, I was able to get my microphone hooked up. I can't believe it. I was able to hear a recording of my voice. I'm getting so excited. I'm still a little bit worried about how to put my voice out there in the world, but I trust you, and I'm gonna keep following your process. And I was like, this is so awesome. She had done so well with her podcast that eventually in episode 275, I asked her to come on the show. And she told this beautiful story about how much she was scared and nervous and felt too old to podcast, how she was scared of technology. However, she, without even asking, told the world on this podcast how easy it was to get it up and running because of my course. And then she told this great story about how she, now whenever she gets a new listener in a new country, and her podcast, by the way, is set up to help people with ADHD, which is something that she teaches people about and helps people through. And she really wanted the story to get out there, but she didn't know how. And then, of course, after helping her, the story goes out there. She has this map in front of her computer. Every time she has a new listener in a new country, she puts the pin up. And although her podcast was only up for a couple months at that time, I asked her, well, how many countries are you in now? And she said, Pat, I'm in 33 different countries. And it makes me so happy knowing this message is finally getting out there. I always had this in all along, and you finally unlocked it for me. I can do it. And now anybody listening to this, you can do it too. And it was just like the most beautiful testimonial that I could have ever asked for. And it wasn't even set up that way. I just wanted to have her come on to have her talk about why she wanted to start a podcast and what her objections were, right? And now, and even still today, because that episode's still live and people listen to it, right? Even though it's in the archive, that's the beautiful thing about podcasting. Well, people go back and they listen to that and they email me and they go, Pat, you better thank Dr. B for selling your course because I bought it because I listened to her story. Right? That's so important to understand. And when you create these stories, whether they're your own stories that you're fine-tuning, or you pull out these stories from others, you're able to hone in on these objections. Because guess what? When a person is thinking of working with you or buying from you, or they see this sales page, what they're wondering is, well, what's the catch here? And they likely are coming up with a number of different objections in their head already. And you should know what these objections are. If you're selling anything, what are the objections, right? There was somebody in SPI Pro yesterday. It's our brand new membership program. And he teaches people how to play video games and make money playing video games. And he had us review his sales page on there. And it was really cool because he's teaching people how to make money by playing video games through advertising, sponsorships, Twitch and ads and all these kinds of things, affiliate deals, whatnot. And it was really interesting. But on the sales page, there was no language about objection. An objection meaning like, okay, let's get specific. This person's teaching people how to play video games. What are some of the objections people have of that? You need to tackle those head on, and you can tell stories that match up to those to unlock, oh, well, I guess, although I had that objection, I can see now that it can still work, right? So one objection is, well, there's a very small percentage of people make money playing video games. So why would it work for me? You have to address that head on. And then if you tell that story wrapped around somebody else's story that you've created, your hero story that you've created, a success story, well, then it's that much more impactful. This is very much something that if you've ever learned from Stu McLaren from Tribe, he tackles these objections head on by using examples from his own audience. So for that specific objection, hey, there's not actually that much money in video games. You can say, like, well, here's a story of somebody who I taught who is now making an additional $500 a month, which is enough to pay for groceries and gas as a result of playing their video games. Here's like legit a real person. Go look at him, right? So there's an objection. Yeah, I could tell his story. Number two, I don't have the time to play. Don't you have to stream for 12 hours a day in order to make any sort of money? This is what these big streamers are doing. Well, you hit that head on. You can make money playing video games without having to stream for hours. You have other responsibilities and other things. You can do this with as little as 2 hours a day if you have to spare. Here's an example of somebody who is a small streamer on Twitch. They have just a couple thousand subscribers, yet they're still able to make an extra $1,000 a month by just streaming 2 hours at a time, 4 days a week. Here's the schedule. So if you have that objection, here's my counterpoint, right? If that makes sense. Another objection for this industry is, well, I'm too old, right? Oh, I'm too old. Video games are for young kids. I'm over 40 years old. Why would people pay me money when I'm not one of these young cats like Ninja or PewDiePie? Oh, well, here is, Janice. She's a mom of two. She's 45 years old, and she streams. In fact, there's a woman, I don't know her real name because I know her username. It's Official Cozy on Twitch. And she's a mom, but she goes live, almost every day after the kids are down. And she's got, I think, 15,000 followers. That's a real life person. And she's like a Twitch affiliate. She's making money too, right? So that's crazy, right? So now we can pull out these stories, showcase them related to these objection focusings, and we can tackle them head on so that when people come to our sales pages or they come to our website or they read our sales pitch, when we insert these stories and objections, people go, oh, well then okay, I guess I can do this. Versus you don't address these, and what happens is people will make up their own reasons for not doing it, right? People will default to doubt, and they have objections. They will have objections. So just keep that in mind as you move forward. The oldest fella I know that streams is 76. He's partnered. Yes, I know another person, Old Buzzard on Twitch. We found him because we were looking for family-friendly content. He's like 70-something years old, and he plays Fortnite, and he's got hundreds of viewers every time he goes live. And it's amazing, right? And I'm sure, I don't know how much money he's making, but I'm sure he's making something, which is pretty cool. So to go over again, after capturing people's attention, and by the way, if you have a question, please feel free to ask. Use the word question in all caps followed by your question. Again, we're talking about storytelling. We have about 15 minutes today to go over some answers for you. But K, know your audience. A, always be authentic. P, practice, practice, practice. O, objection focused. W, work on your story bank. This is the final thing here. We want to work on our story bank. The collection of stories that we capture, big and small, impactful, or even seemingly minuscule, and putting them in a place where we can go back to them, we can practice, we can pull them out when we need to. Again, I got that from Ramit Sethi. So, K, A-P-O-W. Kapow. Kapow. All right? You can make that impact. Kapow. So hey, y'all, I hope you enjoyed today. This is a very important component of doing business, is that storytelling. This removes people from, oh, is this guy selling me on something? Or that initial doubt that people have, and it puts them into that story with you. And when you can provide context, when you can provide relevance, when you can share some emotion one way or another, laughing, crying, smiling, whatever the reaction might be, you've made that much more of a connection with the person, and that connection is key before that transaction happens, if that makes sense. Kind of reminds me of overhead projector slides. What, this over here? I'm just simply using my iPad. Love it. I got 166 characters in my head. The story bank is genius. Thank you, says Quiet Ancestors. Cool. Now, I have to thank all of you while I'm waiting for some questions. If there are any questions, I mean, maybe I did a great job and all of the main questions have been answered. I don't know. Probably not likely. But I just have to thank you, because this is practice for me. This is one of the reasons why I get up every single day. It's for you, obviously, but it's also for me too, because I purposefully go, okay, what stories am I going to tell today? And this is every day, and I've done this for now 124 days straight. And how might I get better at them? And this forces me to, with accountability from you, accountability to the schedule, and now I'm on a streak, right? So there's some habitual things happening here. I don't want to break the streak right now, and it's not going to be broken, at least for a while. I'm not going to do this forever, though. Just keep that in mind. But I'm going to be doing this for a while. Maybe we'll get to a year, a whole year. Wouldn't that be insane? 365 days straight. That's incredible. But anyway, this is practice for me too. And we all have access to tools that allow us to practice more too. All right, I see a question here from Dogs Are the Best Friends. Storybank. Do you literally put them in a spreadsheet to remind you of them all? I have them in an Evernote folder, and those folders are organized in a way where I can, based on topic or lesson, I can pull them out, right? So it's just easier over time. I actually haven't gone in there in a while, so thank you for the reminder. I have to go back and organize that again, because it's been a while. There hasn't been really that much happening outside of the house for a while for me to add more stories, if that makes sense. But yes, it's there, and you can tag them. If you use a spreadsheet, you can use a spreadsheet too. That's what Stu McLaren does. And he has columns where it's marked as, certain objections, or there's tags with certain just reminders, so that if a person ever, or if you ever wanted to create something, you can go back into that story bank and easily sort and find them. April says, Pat Flynn, would love for you to dedicate an entire stream to deep diving into JV partnerships. That's something me and my husband, Roy, have been recently working on, and would love your insight. Thank you for that feedback. So JV, meaning joint venture ships. And April, do you mean JVs to promote your own stuff, or you to promote other people's stuff in particular, or both? Let me know which one in particular are you working with. Grandma Goody says, have you read Randy Olson's storytelling books, Connection or Houston? We have a narrative, or his TED Talk on storytelling. I've seen some of Randy Olson's stuff. I have not read those books in particular, but that is a great resource indeed. Any of his stuff, I would imagine, would be perfect for those who want to dive deeper into storytelling. Raid says, how much time should we spend on telling a story? I would try to tell stories every day, Raid. I would see how you can create, just even within your normal life that you have now, just the conscious effort of telling more stories and getting better at them. Romer says, I don't feel I understood the objection focus step. So the objection focus step means within your stories, talk about the objections that your target audience has so that they can relate to them, and now you essentially are countering them, right? So like in that example of the person whose sales page I was reviewing in SPI Pro about selling a program to teach people how to play video games and make money, I uncovered a number of objections, right? Like the idea of, well, hey, I'm too old for this. Well, then you tell a story about a person who's older who has actually succeeded with that. That way, there's legit a counterpoint to it, and a person goes, oh, okay, I guess I was wrong about that objection that was originally going to have me leave the page and never come back, right? So if you could pull those out in your stories, that's what we need to do. Thank you for that clarification, by the way. Margarita, Texas. Thanks, Pat. This is completely relevant to what's on top of my list to do. Storytelling. Great. Dr. Joella. Keynote slides on iPad. Thank you, Pat. No, and actually, in fact, the way that this works is if I were to zoom out, let's see if I can do this here live with you. I don't mind sharing the behind the scenes. But if I zoom out, this is, in fact, my photos album. It's not even Keynote. I just import from Photoshop in my desktop to my iPad. And now I'm just sharing my iPad screen, and I'm just literally flipping through. It's not even Keynote. Let's make it easy. Let's make it even easier. Pat Flynn, have you thought about recording Ask Pat on the income stream and pulling the audio for the podcast? I have thought about that. So almost like conducting an Ask Pat live, if you will, on the income stream and having that become something as a part of, repurposing that audio and essentially having people watch live these coaching sessions. Yeah, it's something we've thought about before, but just there's so many things that we just haven't been able to do everything yet. Question from Phase Food. How do you tell a story if you're just starting? Isn't the only story an about us mission statement type story at that point? In terms of like about you, yes. But like I said, there are things and moments in your life about the thing that you're teaching that are relevant and would be likely to be pulled up in a podcast episode, a video, and or a blog post. So Phase Food, I don't necessarily know what you're about or what your website or brand is for. But let's just say, for example, that you were, cooking, right, and teaching people how to cook. Well, yes, there's a story about you and how you came up and how you've, learned to love food over time and how you want to share that with the world. That's a great story. But within the section of your website, maybe you have a story about how you eventually learned how to use a knife, right? So you can go back to when you were a kid and you were first introduced to a knife and how scary it was and then how you got over that. Or the story of how you taught your kids to use a knife. So you could see how there's like little moments of your life that could be pulled out and lessons that can be learned within that. This is much better than top 10 ways to use a knife or top 10 ways to teach kids how to use a knife. Maybe that's the title, but you inject story in there so that people are more able to sort of understand the context of it, to understand what the objections might be, but then overcome them because you've proven that and essentially have, gone through that process first now before somebody else. Cool. A few more minutes left. Spanish and Go. I haven't been on for a few days, but thanks for all you do. We crossed 100,000 the other day. 100,000 subs on your YouTube channel, I would imagine. Been working hard on some new projects. Keep dropping that knowledge. Thanks, Spanish and Go. You two are amazing. Have you collected your silver play button yet? I am curious. Congrats on that, by the way. Francis says, do you have any quarantine-specific stories to share? Yeah, I mean, the story about how April has taught the kids how to learn how to fold laundry at a younger age than I did. I learned how to fold laundry when I was 18 in the dorms and not even learning how to do laundry because my mom did it for me all the time. So now we can tell a story about empowering kids or anybody to learn how to do something, although it's hard, although it's tough, although they sit and do it for like 45 minutes because it takes forever for them. But now they have these life skills that they can take with them moving forward versus me when I was going to college and sort of getting embarrassed, asking people next to me, how do I do laundry, right? And feeling like kind of ashamed by it. And just, the idea of maybe parenting and the idea of wanting to do everything for somebody and what that does for them. And even though you care for them that much, well, maybe there's something to be said for letting them swim in the deep end for a little bit and figuring it out on their own. So within that one context story of doing laundry at home, I can pull out multiple stories. The idea of, learning how to manage the pool in our backyard. I've never dealt with a pool before, and chlorination and pH levels and all this stuff, and the lessons that I'm learning there about that are really interesting. The lessons about, putting on more pounds during COVID-19 because I'm not able to, go to the gym anymore or do these kinds of things, right? And sort of how I'm trying to bounce back from that and, getting a rowing machine and all these kinds of things, right? There's so many different ways that we could pull any story and turn it into a lesson. Right? The idea of going live 124 days and what that's turned into. In fact, I don't know if you saw this, but there was an article written about me, by me. I guess I wrote this article. But this article here, what I learned about business and human connection from live streaming for 100 days straight. And this involves you guys. Right? This involves you guys. And this is on entrepreneur.com. We submitted this and it was accepted. And so the story of just going live for 100 days straight and what that means. People want to help and be helped. The same people show up every day. Storytelling is more powerful than ever. Hey, look at that. We closed the loop here, which is really cool. Your nerves will never go away. I still get nervous every time before I go live. But I do it anyway, right? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. So pulling these stories out and even sharing them now within context of what's happening, right? Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Question, when telling your story in a video, how much do you tell in one video? Should someone share their life story as a series? Are there stories that shouldn't be shared? Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think if a story isn't going to be relevant or it doesn't matter, or if it seems to be a distraction, maybe it shouldn't be shared right now or within that space. But I think that also related to, telling one's life story, perhaps it does take a series. I think there's different kinds of stories, right? There's long epic stories, Odysseus and Homer, for example, or there's short stories like the one I told at the beginning of the stream that literally took 5 minutes but brought home the first lesson of knowing who your audience first is. It just, again, it's going to take practice. It's going to take some understanding to know what feels right. And you won't know that until you start telling these stories. I actually tell stories, even to friends and family. I always try to teach through stories or through simple examples. Yeah, this is what helps you become remembered. I mean, you think about that kid who, has that uncle, and it's the uncle that always tells the best stories, right? Like you get remembered because of that, right? Nobody remembers your top 10 list post. They remember the stories that you tell and the context and why it relates to them. You inspired me to count just now 66 countries and growing for calming anxiety. Would dominate world domination just a month or so away. Nice, Martin. Congrats. Question from Startup Flame. What is your opinion on bedtime, cool sleep time stories in audio version for people? I mean, I think that's cool. It's a good opportunity during people's down times, or how we have a morning routine. A lot of people have an evening routine. If you can insert yourself into an evening routine for somebody as they're going to bed, maybe it's calming, maybe it's something that sort of helps them think about the day and have gratitude for it, whatever the case may be, it can be useful. And if you can inject that into a person's life as a habit, as a part of their normal day, I mean, you've got a listener for life at that point. Question, are your slides downloadable? These ones are not downloadable, but they are definitely here on YouTube afterwards, obviously, within the context of the stream. Cool, like IG Live slides, thank you. Rhino Dog says, did that objective also work with a guest in an interview to help the listener see the objective side to help them? Yeah, absolutely. If you're doing an interview, like we talked about yesterday when we were talking about conducting world-class interviews, being a good listener is important. Diving deeper into their story is important, the story of the person you're interviewing. But if you can get to those objections and just get to them head on. So, hey, thank you for telling me the story about how you quit your job and how you then became successful. But tell me about some of the struggle points. What were the big blockers? What were the big hurdles that you had to go over? And then diving deeper into those. All right, one more minute. Maybe I have time for one more question here. Cool. Question. This will be the last question. How do you clean up a story of struggle to not paint certain people negatively, or does it even matter? You can use the sort of disclaimer of, I'm not going to mention anybody's names because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, right? You can mention that. I think it's definitely important to be aware of, if you mention other people in your story, how they come across and what you're saying about them and how that feels. Empathy is really key here. But there are ways to tell stories about people without having to mention people's names, right? You can just make it more about the situation than about the person, right? So, hey, let me tell you about a time something pretty dramatic happened to me. There was this guy, and he did this, when I tell the story about the hater, the one that almost made me quit back in the early days, who left a negative comment, not just on my blog, but a 250 to 500 word comment that was all about pat shaming, essentially, and how I was a scammer and all this stuff on dozens of blogs. Everywhere where I was featured in a podcast or a blog post, this person left this comment, and I made it about the situation, and I made it about how I was feeling, and not about that person. And of course, naturally, that person is not, there's sort of the evil person in the story, but, it's not worth calling out their name, nor do I want to give them any additional attention. But yeah. Anyway, storytelling. It's a skill that we can improve. Hey, Archer, thank you so much for the super chat, my friend. I appreciate you. And I'm glad you're here, and I know your team replay, so I hope you all can catch that. And thank you all so much for coming in. A lot of likes today. I appreciate you for that. I hope this idea of storytelling is something that resonates with you. And I just want to encourage you today to try to tell one story better than you've told it before, right? Or tell a story for the first time to somebody. And maybe you just sit down with your spouse and go, hey, can I tell you a funny story? Or can I tell you something that happened to me when I was young? Or just something like that. And I promise you, if you capture that attention up front and you tell a story and you're conscious about how you can make an impact with it, I promise you it's going to make an impact one way or another. So keep up the great work. Thank you so much, Team Flynn, for being here. You are amazing, and I look forward to serving you tomorrow. Tomorrow, Wednesday, remember, we start a half hour earlier. As a reminder, on Wednesdays, we start a half hour earlier so that I can get to a call that I need to get to. So that'll be 7:30 a.m., 10:30 a.m. Eastern, 7:30 a.m. Pacific. And this is the link to remember, patflynn.com/theincomestream. And remember, it's all about stories and what's being told and whose stories are being told to. Cheers, take care, thanks so much, and as always, Team Flynn for the win. Peace.
This is the income stream to help you achieve your dream. All while we keep it clean. This is the income stream. It's the kind of show where you can come and go, but then you leave inspired with no fee required. The income stream with Pat Flynn.
Thanks so much. We're creating stories every day. Be sure to capture them, put them in your story bank, practice them, and no matter how small or minuscule those life events may be, it can be turned into a story. Good luck. Peace out. I appreciate you.
Bruh.